Okay, so we were talking about factoring quadratic trinomials. 6x squared minus 5x minus 6 is a quadratic trinomial. It has three terms. That's why it's a trinomial, and it has a quadratic because it has a square on the x. All right, so when we factor a trinomial like this, we factor it into two binomials. And the way to know how to do that is to understand the relationship between the numbers, the coefficients, and the constants in the two binomials and the coefficients and the constant in the trinomial. How do those numbers relate to each other? Where do they come from? Etc. So remember that when you multiply two binomials like this, 3x plus 2 times 2x minus 3, we use what we call the FOIL method. You multiply the first two numbers, then you multiply the outer numbers, then you multiply the inner numbers, and then you multiply the last numbers. All right, and that is how these values come about. All right, so we're talking about the trinomial now, 6x squared minus 5x minus 6. This first term is called the leading term, and its coefficient is 6 here. Where does that 6 come from? Well, it comes when you are FOILing and you multiply the first two numbers. That's where that 6 comes from. So the first two numbers in the parentheses, that's where the leading term coefficient comes from. Those two numbers are factors of the leading coefficient of the trinomial. Okay, now how about the constant in our trinomial? Where does that come from? That comes when we multiply the last numbers in the parentheses. So that's where that -6 comes from multiplying 2 times -3. Now, where does the 5 come from? The -5 here. Well, that, as I was saying in class, comes from adding the means, which the two middle numbers, we can call them the means, and the extremes. The extremes are the outer numbers. So this x term, -5, comes when we add this product, 4x, and this product, 9x. Well, the 9x is negative because you're multiplying 3x times -3. So that product of the extremes is -9. And the product of the means is 2 times 2x, which is 4x. So you've got 4x minus 9x, and that's where the -5x comes from. So if you can remember these relationships, you'll be able to factor because you'll know how to unfoil, which is what factoring is in this case. It is unfoiling the trinomial. All right, so we're going to look at some examples. The first one you have is 6x squared plus x minus 2. So if you want to unfoil this, you're going to have to do two sets of parentheses. You're going to unfoil it into two binomials. The numbers that come first here and here we know are going to be factors of 6 because that's the leading term, and we know that where that comes from is when we multiply these two together. So we need the factors of 6. So the factors of 6 are 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Those are the ways you can factor 6. So we can try either one. Let's say we try 2 and 3. So starting out, put a 2x here and a 3x here. That will give me 6x squared, my first term. So that's what I want. Now, how about this term, the constant term? Again, that comes when we multiply these last two things. That's where the -2 comes from. So the factors of 2 are 2 and 1. That's it. They're only 2. It's prime. Okay, so we can just stick them in wherever. Now, you have to understand that factoring is a trial and error process. You have to try the possibilities to see which ones are going to work. Okay, so we know that 2 times 1 is 2, but the question is, how can we end up with a 1 for the coefficient on x? And so that's what we have to figure out. So that 1, the coefficient on x, comes from adding the product of the means and the product of the extremes. So what do we have here? The product of the means is 2 times 3, which is 6. The product of the extremes is 2 times 1, which is 2. And the question is, can I add those things together somehow to get 1? No. There's no way I can get 6 and 2 to add up to 1, no matter where I put the negative signs, no matter what I do. So this is not going to work. Having the numbers where they are now is not going to work. All right, so I can do a couple of different things. I can switch the 2 and the 3, the 2x and the 3x, or I can switch the 2 and the 1. I'm going to start by switching the 2 and the 1. So if I put the 1 here and the 2 here, that will change things. So the means now, the product of the means is 1 times 3, which is 3. The product of the extremes now is 4. So can I use 3 and 4 to add up to 1, the coefficient on x? And I can if I make the 4 positive and the 3 negative. So to do that, to make the 4 positive, I would put a plus sign here, so it would be 2x times positive 2, which would give me 4. To get the negative 3, I need to put a minus sign here to give me negative 1 times 3 to give me negative 3. So now I have everything in the right place. 2x times 3x does give me 6x squared. Negative 1 times 2 does give me negative 2. And negative 3x plus positive 4x does give me 1x. So this is the factorization for 6x squared plus x minus 2. So this is how we factor a quadratic trinomial. It's not by memorizing some tricks, it's by understanding where each number comes from. And it is by trial and error. All right, so let's look at the next example. Your leading coefficient on this one is 2. There's only 2 factors of 2, and they are 2 and 1. So I can be absolutely sure that this needs to be 2x and this needs to be x, because there's no other way to get 2x squared. And then here I've got 15. The factors of 15 are 15 times 1, 3 times 5, and 5 times 3. That's it. Those are the only possibilities. So I can already say for sure, pretty much, that 15 and 1, no matter where I put them, the means and extremes are not going to help me get 7, because if I put it like this, I'm going to have a 2 times 1 is 2, and 15 times 1 is 15, and I'm supposed to get a 7 out of that when I add it. That can't happen. So the 15 and the 1 can't go like that. I could put the 1 here and the 15 here, and that's going to make things even worse, because then I'm going to have 30 and a 1 and trying to get a 7 out of it. That's not going to happen. So I'm going to try the 5 and the 3. I could put the 5 here and the 3 here and see if that's going to help me to get that 7. Well, if I do that, the means are going to be 5x and the extremes are going to be 6x. Can I take 5 and 6 and get 7 out of it? No, I cannot. So it's time to switch the 5 and the 3. If I put the 3 here and the 5 here, let's see what's going to happen. The means, 3 times x, that gives me 3x. And the extremes, 2 times 5, is going to give me 10. Can I make 7 with a 10 and a 3? Yes, I can. This is negative 7, so I'm going to make my 10 negative and my 3 positive. If I do that, it will add up to negative 7. So how am I going to get this to be a negative 10? I have to put a minus sign in front of the 5. That'll be 2 times negative 5 will give me negative 10. How do I get a positive 3 here? I put a plus sign in front of the 3, and that will be 3 times 1, which is 3. And so that is the factorization of 2x squared minus 7x minus 15. So for 105.3, I want to solve this equation. So in the other two, I was just factoring two expressions. It wasn't an equation. But now I want to solve this equation. And of course, when you want to solve a quadratic equation, you use factoring by getting everything on one side of the equation and having 0 on the other side. And we do that because of the zero factor theorem. which is one of the most important theorems in all of algebra. And it tells me that if I multiply two numbers together to get 0, then one of them has to be 0. Either A is 0 or B is 0. That's a fact. There's no other way to get 0 by multiplication than to multiply by 0. So if two numbers multiply together give me 0, one of them has to be 0, and that's what I'm using when I factor to solve a quadratic. So I have to get everything on one side, so there's a 0 on one side. I can't use the zero factor theorem if there's no 0. So I'm going to move that negative 6x squared to the left side of the equation, so that I'm going to have positive 6x squared minus 5x minus 6 equals 0. So now I'm going to factor this, and it will be equal to 0, and then I'll know that one of those factors has to be 0 to make that product equal 0. But first, I've got to do the factoring. So I'm looking at my leading term, and it is 6. So I know that the numbers that have to go in these two blanks need to multiply together to give me 6, which means they have to be 2 and 3 or 6 and 1. I'm going to try 2 and 3. And those will have an x next to them because they are supposed to multiply together to give me 6x squared. Okay, now I've got to figure out the two numbers that go here. Again, the constant term is also 6. And so that means in those two blanks, this is where the constant comes from, is multiplying those two blanks. I can put 2 and 3 or 6 and 1, and I can put them in different places. So I'm going to go ahead and use 2 and 3 again. I'll put a 2 here and a 3 here and see what I get. All right, I need the means, the product of the means plus the product of the extremes needs to be -5. So let's see what we have. If I multiply the means, I get 6. If I multiply the coefficients of the extremes, I also get 6. Is there any way I can use 6 and 6 to get -5? No, I cannot add those together in any way that will give me a -5. So I'm going to switch the 2 and the 3 here. I'm going to take that 3 and put it there. Now let's try the means and the extremes again. Here are the means. 3 times 3 is 9. And the extremes, 2 times 2 is 4. Can I somehow add 9 and 4 to get -5? Yes, I can. If I make the 9 negative and I make the 4 positive, I can add that up to -5. And that's what I need to do, is make that happen. So to get a -9, I need this 3 to be negative. So I'll have -3 times +3 to give me -9. To get a +4, I need the 2x to be positive, which it already is, and I need the 2 to be positive. And so this is the factorization for that quadratic trinomial. And now I can solve the quadratic equation, because I know that 2x minus 3 times 3x plus 2 is 0. That means that either the first thing is 0 or the second thing is 0. This is the zero factor theorem. One of them has to be 0 if you multiply them together and get 0, which you do. So we have set them both equal to 0, and now we have to solve for x. So in this first little equation, we're going to add 3 to both sides, and we're going to have 2x equals 3, and then divide by 2, and you get x equals 3 over 2. So that is one of the solutions to this quadratic equation. The other factor was 3x plus 2. If we set that equal to 0, we subtract 2 on both sides. So we have 3x equals -2, divide by 3, and you have x equals -2/3. So these are the solutions to that quadratic equation right there. These are the numbers that if you put them into that equation for x, the equation will be true. And we can check that right here. So if I put 3/2 in for x into that equation, I'll have -5 times 3/2 minus 6, and that is supposed to equal -6 times 3/2 squared. Let's see if this makes a true statement. So -15/2 minus 6 is equal to -6 times 9/4. And so that would mean I would have 15/2 minus 6 is equal to -54 over 4. And if I multiply this equation by 4, I'm going to have the 4 and the 2 will cancel, and I'll have negative 30. And then the 6 times 4 is 24. And then negative 54 over 4 times 4 is just negative 54. And this is a true statement, so I know that 3/2 is a solution of this equation. Now I'm going to try negative 2/3. I'll just have to do that over here. So going up to that equation that has kind of been covered up, but still there, negative 5x, so negative 5 times negative 2/3 minus 6 equals negative 6 times negative 2/3 squared. And so that is going to be 10/3 minus 6 is equal to negative 6 times 4 over 9. So that's multiplication. And so I have 10/3 minus 6 is equal to negative 24 over 9. If I multiply both sides of that equation by 9, I'm going to have 30 minus 54 is equal to negative 24, and that is true. So the two solutions to this quadratic equation are x equals 3/2 and negative 2/3. Those are the two solutions, and a quadratic equation will always have two solutions.